Every idea starts with a problem. Warby Parker's was simple. Glasses are too expensive. So they set out to change that. By designing glasses in-house and selling directly to customers, they're able to offer prescription eyewear that's expertly crafted and unexpectedly affordable. Warby Parker glasses are made from premium materials like impact-resistant polycarbonate and custom acetate. And they start at just $95, including prescription lenses. Get glasses made from the good stuff. Stop by a Warby Parker store near you.
Late night conservative talk show in America. Sackheads Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Sackhead Sean and Sackhead Clint. And we're working on the immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work here too. Around the world to the best late night conservative talk, Sackheads Radio.
Radio.
The best late night conservative talk show in America. In America.
And in this web was a large, I'm pretty sure it was the biggest spider I've ever seen.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is the 6th of January, 2016. Happy New Year to you all here on the Sackheads Radio Show. Thank you so much for sticking us out with the new year. I want to throw a special thank you to Dan Butcher over at High Plains.
Here's your coffee, sir.
Thank you very much. It's about time. To Dan Butcher over at High Plains for helping us out with what I think is a pretty awesome redo of our webpage. Excellent stuff. And we definitely appreciate all his hard work. Coming up,
it was a vertical reboot.
Let's
call it what it was, okay? It was a complete vertical reboot.
If I thought you knew what the hell you were talking about, I'd agree.
It sounded awesome, didn't it?
Sackhead Sean, Sackhead Clint, as you can see, finally found himself a microphone.
I finally found you a cup of coffee. You're welcome.
Amen, baby. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. That's what I say. Coming up here in just a few minutes, we have Joseph Rice on the air. Joseph's going to update us on the Hammond Ranch, everything that's going on in Oregon. He's with the Oathkeepers, the Pacific Patriots Northwest, and really gives you an interesting story about what actually happened up there, which we're all about truth on this show, so to finally get some regarding the Hammond Ranch incident would be a nice thing. Real quick, I have to say hello to my good friend Clint. How are you, sir?
I'm well. How are you?
Oh, you know me, just living the dream, baby.
My voice, I don't know if my voice is going to last. I've had this cold for like stinking week.
Well,
plus.
You don't.
Actually, matter of fact, we missed last Wednesday because you were under the weather.
I was under the weather.
I was sick as a dog.
Quite literally, there were clouds over there.
Quite literally under weather.
Well, I'm glad you were able to trope through. And
I don't know who the weather is,
hey,
but he's a good-looking
Carl.
dude, and you were under him.
Carl Weathers.
Yeah, Carl Weathers, and you were under him.
Why does it always go this way? Hey, if you're not in the chat room, go to shrmedia.com, click live chat. Why? We have a lot. After we have the segment with Joseph, we're going to give him as much time as he needs. We're definitely going to have questions. I don't want to cut him short because this is kind of one of the biggest stories right now in the country. There's a lot of confusion as to what's going on with this, so I want to try to clear that up and hopefully get some good questions answered. But after that, obviously, we're going to talk about the executive actions. I
want to talk about Hillary not being able to differentiate on Chris Matthews between a socialist and a Democrat.
And do you remember?
We'll talk about it later.
What's her name? Screwball Schultz. Debbie Washburn Schultz. Same show, same question. Couldn't do it.
Right. You'd think Hillary would know.
You'd think she was ready for it.
I kind of have to give Chris Matthews props, but we'll talk about that later.
We will talk about that later.
Mayhaps. Did you see the new Star Wars?
Yes.
Okay, so the most amazing part for me.
Yes, get us killed by all of our listeners. Outstanding. All the conservative nerds out there will be thrilled because they've been working their rear ends off for the last and haven't had a chance to see it because they actually have jobs and stuff. Way to go, you bastard.
Dude, I couldn't believe it when I saw that one thing.
Dude, I know, right? When that thing happened,
Yeah.
It was horrible.
I laughed and laughed, and then I cried and cried and cried. And then I laughed, and I giggled.
Oh.
And I ate popcorn.
Well, without any further ado, and he is on hold. So, and I know he's made a lot of time out of his day for us specifically, so I don't want to hold him up anymore.
Or night.
What time of day is it?
Night.
I don't know. You just drive me here and I talk. It's still 2015, right?
Yeah, go with that. It'll be fine.
Good.
You should put that on all the checks we send out for our bills. It'll be fine.
Joseph Rice, sir, are you there?
Good evening. Yes, I am.
All right. Let me turn your mic up on my end, because where the hell's Sacco? Our producer. Where's Sacco?
I don't know. Maybe he's with...
I don't know.
Maybe he's with Mr. Rice.
No, we'd hear all about it. Did you guys lose a Sasquatch with a Sackhead shirt? Yeah, as a matter of fact, we did.
Thanks
just
for
give him
finding
$20
him.
and point him south. He'll come back. He does this all the time. Joseph, sorry to keep you waiting. How are you, sir?
Tired, but good.
I don't blame you for being tired. You've had a rough couple weeks here. First of all, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and all the groups that you're associated with, and then let's get into the Hammond Ranch and how it all started, where it is now, and what's the resolution we're looking for.
Sure. No. Basically, I'm the Josephine County coordinator for Oathkeepers, and we had the sugar pine mine occur here within Josephine County, and it was titled Operation Gold Rush. And, that was a situation where we had two miners that had some abusive nature with BLM. They issued them a cease and desist order and completely bypassed the Constitution and their Fifth Amendment right to due process. And the miners approached us and asked us to come up and protect them from a Fourth Amendment violation of, like illegal search and seizure of their belongings, their mining equipment in their mine. And we successfully ran that operation for about 6-7 weeks. And finally, BLM relented, and they wound up in the Internal Board of Land Appeals, and that case is still quagmire there with no movement. But after Sugar Pine, what was noted is if you will call them patriot groups, were not really communicating. We were all kind of doing our own thing. And so myself and 4 others founded the Pacific Patriot Network. And that brought under a coordination umbrella Oathkeepers, Oregon 3%, Idaho 3%, Bearded Bastards, Central Oregon Constitutional Guard, Southern Oregon Constitutional Guard, heirs of Patrick Henry. We all do our individual things, but in times of need or crisis, we can all coordinate and work together to affect a positive outcome. So that's a little bit about me.
And, sir, if I could just ask for a second, I certainly appreciate you calling in. And
Hair thinning can happen for so many reasons. Whether it's stress or hormones or anything, at Nutrafol we've learned that real change starts below the surface. Our hair growth supplements take a whole-body approach and target the key root causes of hair thinning, so you can see visibly thicker, stronger hair in 3 to 6 months.
Hair growth starts from the inside at Nutrafol.com. That's Nutrafol.com.
And thank you for your service as well, based upon the fact that you're an Oathkeeper. I assume you have a service background, so I'm going to thank you for that. All of our listeners may not be aware of what the Oathkeeper groups are or what a 3%er is with some of the groups you were discussing. Would you mind just talking real briefly about what the Oathkeepers are? Because, look, there's a lot of information about Oathkeepers out there, some positive, some negative. Some folks believe everything they read on Southern Poverty Law Center. Some folks actually interject some common sense and take a look at what exactly is being said from the folks. But if you could just tell our listeners real briefly about Oathkeepers and about what it is to be a 3%er, please.
Sure. Oathkeepers, and the way I became involved in it, and you're right, I do have military service. I spent 17 years with the Army as a helicopter pilot.
Thank you.
I was, no worries, the honor and privilege and the duty of the nation.
You know, if God meant for people to fly that way, he would have designed birds differently. You understand that,
right? True.
Okay, I apologize.
No worries. When I joined, the military, back in 1981, I was administered an oath, and that oath was to uphold and defend the Constitution, and it states in there against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That didn't come with an expiration date. It didn't say to the end of my military career. It was a lifelong commitment. And many veterans and those in law enforcement and other offices take this dear to our heart. The Constitution is the people's document. It says we the people, and it's designed to constrain government, not the people. And we've dealt in a period of administrative overreach where people believe we're now run by administrative regulations, not law, constitutional law. So with that oath, we've always conduct our lives maybe a little bit differently. We look at the morality, the high ground, integrity, those types of things that reflect on us. So I went into the contracting world. I was working overseas. I did 3 rotations, tours in Afghanistan, and my last one I was injured. So I was sitting around licking my wounds, if you will, and I came across Oathkeepers. And the mantra of Oathkeepers is to honor that oath, the one that you took to the Constitution, to uphold it in your current position, your retired position. And what we see today is there are many good people in law enforcement, in the military, that believe in that oath. The irony is it was administered by the federal government. And so some of our activities now are chastised by the federal government for honoring our constitutional oath. It's not on the current agenda. But, it states foreign and domestic. We're really good at identifying what a foreign enemy is, but what's a domestic enemy? And I personally have come to the conclusion that a domestic enemy is anybody that will willfully violate the constitutional right of another American. And, we're a constitutional republic. We're a nation of law. And the protection of the individual right protects all of our rights. We're not managed or ruled by the mob, a democracy, which is mob rule, where whatever the current flavor of the month is the way everybody goes. No, we protect those individual rights. And sometimes that's a very difficult and challenging thing to do. People have jobs. They want to, provide for their families, yet their current position, they may be asked to do things unconstitutionally, and it takes moral courage for them to stand up and say no. So kind of a long-winded explanation there. The Constitution and the Oath Keepers, we believe that oath, and we want to see it exercised in our current professionals out there, in our elected representatives. I like to call them elected employees, and those that serve in the military, serve in law enforcement, serve in anything that swore that oath, because that's what is the foundation of our nation. Having traveled around the world, you can see how lucky and fortunate we are to have the protection of this document. You can go into other countries and realize they do not have the same liberties and freedoms that we as Americans enjoy. Unfortunately, we're seeing what I call institutional or administrative creep. We're seeing the slow erosion of those constitutional liberties and freedoms. If your pursuit of happiness is working together on this radio show, good on you. If it's digging dirt and pulling ore out of the ground, good. You have the right to do that. But that's the individual right and the protection. So with the Oath Keepers, we look to support that. And the same thing with the Oregon 3 Percenters. And the 3 Percenters, and actually Idaho 3 Percenters, are the 3% organization. What they do is during the American Revolution and when we initially established our constitutional democracy, our republic, it was only 3% of the population that rose up and fought. So that's how the 3% comes to be. So that's kind of how the two organizations work. We're very service-based. Everybody tends to report, those are the guys, they're militia, they go to guns. 80% of what Oathkeepers of Josephine County do is public service. We have painted the Josephine County Fairgrounds. We have cleaned out horse stalls. We've maintained buildings. We've done structural repairs. We have a ramps program that every month we build a ramp at no cost to a disabled veteran, senior citizen, handicapped. We do a veterans outreach. We've built a handicapped playground. We do trash pickup. We just do a variety of things. But as we saw with the Sugar Pine Mine, when the community needs us, we'll also stand in harm's way protecting that individual constitutional right from government encroachment and overreach.
Yeah, and that's kind of the big difference, I think. And I like. Thank you for explaining that to folks that may or may not understand kind of what that's about, or what the people involved are, and they may only read the negative press that's out there, and a lot of people don't have an understanding of we are in fact a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy. That's not taught in school. The Constitution is the law of the land, not what a judge says as a faulty interpretation based on case law that's been interpreted X number of times over. This is the foundation of our country, and we've really kind of gotten away from that, obviously. So talk about, if you don't mind, sir, the situation and kind of how everything has evolved to kind of get where we are now.
On this radio program? Or out in Eastern Oregon?
Oh, I'm sorry. In Eastern Oregon, I apologize. It's been a very long week.
I'm sorry, that was a loaded question. I had to go.
Yeah. No, look, if you want to tell us how the hell two jackasses got time on a radio show and how people actually listen to us, I'm all ears, because it defies all freaking logic.
Well, it's interesting because people are fearful of standing up. That takes a certain amount of moral courage.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is you can watch the strength in numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And people get caught up in the national rhetoric. They get caught up in the state rhetoric. But where do you live? You live in your community. You live in your county, your town. And we really advocate development of community. Work within your community, protect it. Because if everything goes down the tubes or whatever may happen, that's where you live. That's where your family is. That's where you can have the greatest impact. And we're always focused at trying to change from the top down, the outrage. We need to start from the bottom up. We need to start on the street we live in, then the town we live in, then the county we live in. And that's how we enact real, lasting change. So with us here, that kind of leadership happened, and people started coming to us and asking us what was going on. Part of it is we pay attention to what is going on. We look at individuals that have had issues or we feel there's been a violation, or they come to us for help. And one of the members of the Pacific Patriot Network, there's 5 of us, as I said, myself as a founder, Brandon Rapola is a founding member, Chino Ruiz is a founding member, Brandon Curtis is, and also BJ Soper. BJ was monitoring the situation out in Burns, Oregon with the Hammonds. And the Hammond family are generational ranchers in Eastern Oregon. They were tried by the federal government and convicted on arson. Now, if people don't understand, if you look at the national landscape, the map, go east of the Mississippi and you do not find much public or federally managed land. Public lands are managed by the federal government. They're owned by the people, but managed by federal agencies. You go west, and we have a tremendous amount. As an example, Oregon's got over 52% of federally managed public land. Massachusetts, 1%. What happens there is it impacts economy. And you'll have generational ranchers, miners, woods workers, timber fallers, whatever they are, that they use the land, the public land, for the economic health of their local community. But they have to go through what was used to be 30 years ago a fairly simplistic process that today is suffocated in bureaucracy and frustration, needless expense, and overmanagement. So in Eastern Oregon, with the rancher situation, they burn off their rangelands to regenerate feed for their cattle.
Which is a common practice.
Land. It's very common. It's a normal land maintenance practice. It's not unusual. So the Hammonds have a private ranch, and then they have grazing allotments on public land, BLM managed land. So what we have to understand is 30 years ago, the Hammonds out in Eastern Oregon pretty much had exclusive use of those publicly managed lands. But as we moved through the Clinton administration, they kind of redefined the landscape and the map. So along with the ranchers having access to it, you wanted people to go out and also recreate on it. And then you wanted the hunters to use it. And then, the environmentalists came along and didn't want, anyone to use any of the above. So you kind of have a round robin, but it's public land. We, the people, own that land. And so with their grazing leases, they lease the right to have their cattle on the land to graze, but all the other users also have a right to it. It's public land. So that wasn't well defined or explained by these management agencies, so you kind of had a clash of all the different users. With the Hammond situation, it was vastly different in that Dwight Hammond, and we just recently found this out a few days ago, he had a lightning-caused fire, and that fire was approaching the Hammond Ranch. In that, Dwight lit backfires to protect his ranch for what is feed for his cattle, his grazing land, and it burned approximately 139 acres. What was interesting is the county investigated it, determined there was no charges. The state investigated it. They did charge him with arson, but then dropped the charges when they realized what was going on. And then a few years went by and nothing happened, and the federal government came in and charged him with 19 counts. Now, it was transferred to a U.S. prosecutor, Frank Papagni, and Mr. Papagni dropped 10 of the counts. There were 9 counts. It was tried in Pendleton, Oregon. Judge Hogan sat as the judge. It was before a jury of their peers. And of the 9 charges, Dwight Hammond was convicted on a single charge of arson, lighting the backfire. We have spoken with the Hammonds. We've met with the sheriff. We've also gone over and met with Mr. Papagni because you've got to get all sides of the story to be fair about it and understand where everyone's coming from. Unfortunately, a couple of days ago, we found out that there was a witness to this event of Dwight lighting the backfires. And what preceded that was BLM lighting a fire around the Hammond Ranch in a horseshoe shape. And it was Dwight responding to this lit fire to keep it from rolling onto his land. There's an eyewitness that saw this, has spoken to Mr. Papagni, and Mr. Papagni never got back to the guy. And apparently the fence does not know of his existence until he walked into this situation in the wildlife refuge on Monday and spoke with him out there and told him his story. So going on, after the trial, Dwight Hammond was convicted of the 1 count of arson. And arson in 1996, Congress moved it under the Domestic Terrorism and Death Penalty Act. Mm-hmm. So Dwight Hammond was sentenced under that act, and it carries a mandatory minimum of 5 years. Judge Hogan felt that would be a violation of his 8th Amendment right of cruel and unusual punishment, and he therefore stated that. He also stated the government had not shown how Dwight Hammond had damaged the land, but in fact his actions had improved it. because it increased grazing for cattle, and therefore he sentenced him to 90 days. Dwight Hammond surrendered himself to federal prison. He served his 90 days, he was released, and he went home. He's been home for 2 years. In October, Susan Aiken, the district judge in Eugene, sentenced Dwight Hammond back to prison for 5 years because she stated the original judge made a mistake in sentencing. Dwight Hammond should have been given the mandatory minimum of 5 years. That Judge Hogan should not have used his judicial discretion in his sentencing, and therefore that's what's happened. Dwight's going back to prison. He surrendered on Monday. So you have a situation where the individual legitimately at the time served his sentence. He's been home for 2 years, and now the government is putting him back in prison.
What brought his case back up to the attention of this other judge?
There was a U.S. attorney, and I'm trying to remember her name. She had, in fact, put it up for a review. And what she did is she said this did not meet the mandatory minimum, and therefore it had to go up for sentencing. So she appealed it to the Ninth Circuit.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, enough said.
All right.
Yeah. So here's where the story gets a little interesting. Amanda Marshall is a U.S. attorney for Oregon. She was appointed by the current administration.
What?
And, yes, she was taken out of the Oregon
ACLU?
No, it's not that bad.
Oh.
She was pulled out of the Oregon Child Advocacy inside the Oregon Department of Justice. So she was working in child advocacy in the Oregon Department of Justice, and she was appointed as the U.S. Attorney for Oregon, for the state of Oregon. And so she is the one that pushed it back for the 5-year sentence. What's interesting now is Ms. Marshall has resigned from the U.S. Attorney's Office because she's currently under investigation for stalking and harassing a subordinate in her office. So that...
Wow.
I kid you not. She has resigned, and she was under investigations. Her resignation states she was resigning for health reasons, but the Office of Inspector General was investigating her based on a hostile work complaint filed by Attorney Karen in her office.
So she was stalking another female?
A male. It was
a male.
A gentleman in the office.
So obviously this broad's not hot. Otherwise this guy wouldn't have complained.
Well, hold on.
Let's pull a picture, Sean, because I have to. Inquiring minds have to know.
That's what I like about you. Always getting to the important part of the subject.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh,
listen, sometimes I just pick up on those little things, you know? Using my intuition here.
I'll read a statement. Amanda Marshall, former U.S. Attorney for Oregon. Marshall recommended the federal government challenge the Hammond's original sentences. By law, the convictions come with a mandatory 5-year sentence, but U.S. District Judge Michael Hogan in 2012 balked at the punishment and instead sentenced Dwight Hammond to 3 months. Marshall called Hogan's punishment, quote, unlawful. The Solicitor General authorized a rare appeal of an Oregon judge's order. The appeals court, the Ninth, sided with the prosecution, and the Hammonds were sentenced by Judge Aiken back to prison for 5 years. So
is she gonna do this for major narcotics criminals and so forth also with this whole early release program that the feds just released a bunch of people? So why are they trying to send people back?
You bring up a really valid point. The Justice Department has opened up into going down a slippery slope.
Right.
Are they going to go back through and review all sentences and decide if it was appropriate or not appropriate. And then the question is, why do we have judges? Judge Hogan retired 2 days after the Hammond case. He was due to retire, he was scheduled for retire, and he's finished. He was a long-term jurist. Everyone I've spoken to, he appears to have been well-respected. He was fair, reasonable, and rational. I believe Judge Hogan did what a judge is paid and expected to do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Part of another issue driving in here is this mandatory minimum. Could someone explain any place how a 74-year-old rancher with no history of violence is going back to prison for 5 years?
Yeah, and you had a federal judge rule that it was a constitutional violation, the sentence in this case, of this rancher's Eighth Amendment, based upon the facts and circumstances as he heard them in court. So now you have another judge, or I don't know if the ninth made this ruling. Was it a panel, or was it the entire ninth that heard it? Do you know?
My understand it was a 3-judge panel that concurred it had not been sentenced. But you have 3 areas here. Marshall didn't have to make the request. The Ninth Circuit could have said, yes, Judge Hogan was in error. He didn't sentence to the mandatory minimum. But Dwight Hammond has served the entire sentence handed by Judge Hogan, and he's been home for 2 years, so we're going to call it good and move on with other stuff. And when it got down to Judge Ann Aiken in Eugene, she could have done the exact same thing. They all chose not to do it.
Right. And the ninth could have just said, hey, this case has been ruled on. The ninth isn't going to expand anybody's sentence anywhere else, so why in this case? The Ninth Circuit does not have a history of being tough on crime.
At all.
No, they don't. And that's the weird part about this. Now, here's the other side of it. So they are federally charged. Dwight Hammond is criminally charged and sentenced to 90 days, completes his sentence, goes home for 2 years. BLM also levies an administrative fine against Dwight Hammond. And this is something people need to understand. When I speak of constitutional, we have in the United States, we're conditioned to a legal system. Mm-hmm. And that's what we see playing out on TV shows and courtrooms. That's a perpetuation of process and legal. You've got attorneys and judges making up the rules, running their little games in the legal system. Then you have the Constitution. That's a lawful system. And the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The drafters of that document intended it to be understood and comprehended by the common man. So basically, you and I can get the gist of what they were intending to say. So we deal with a legal system or we deal with a lawful system. The Hammonds, I believe, were caught up in a legal system, and part of that was BLM's leveling of an administrative or a civil fine against the Hammonds. My understanding is originally, for the 139 acres, the Hammonds were asked to pay a fine of $600,000. But BLM will reduce that fine to $400,000 if the Hammonds gave the Bureau of Land Management first right of refusal to purchase their ranch.
All right, and I gotta.
Oh, that's interesting.
Wow, let's stop right there because we do have to break. And so a nice, rational $400,000 fine for essentially saving more land and a little forest fire.
Listen, we'll give you a $200,000 break if you just promise to sell us your land.
Wow,
for $400,000. So basically, if you give us everything, like it's all good.
Imagine, can you enact a RICO law against the BLM?
I wish.
I would like to see it. Let's take another thing. So you're in Eastern Oregon. What do you think an acre of land costs out there? Probably $250 to $500.
Yeah.
Let's be generous. Let's say it's $1,000 an acre. So you could purchase the land for $139,000, but let's instead get them to pay a $400,000 administrative fine.
And they already maintain.
Yeah, and the other question I have, and I know we're up against a break, but the other question I have is after he served his 90 days and he's been out for 2 years, was there a 2-year period of federal probation which my understanding is standard. And if it was and he completed it,
where's
how
the rub?
How are they able to go back? And I don't know the answers to those.
My understanding is there's no probation. When the federal crime's done, you're done. State laws do give you probation. The feds, you're done, you're done.
Well, no,
the feds can do 80. You can do 80% time federal, 80 to 100%, and then there's usually like a 2-year monitoring period.
But with his age, they may not have done it.
They might not have done it
because he's not a threat at all.
Right.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to pick up at the $200,000 generous break.
I'm getting so pissed right now.
I know you. I can see it.
I'm staring at this can of Copenhagen as we speak.
Oh, man.
That's sitting right next to my Springfield.
We're going to pick up at the $400,000 fine and move forward to where we are today with Joseph Rice. Stick around. We'll be right back here on the Sackheads Radio Show.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians.
You got a business. You didn't build that.
A team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying cow for the stupid bro.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on shrmedia.com.
Hey, it's Jersey Joe from Reaver of Common Sense, and we have moved to a new night and time. Every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on shrmedia.com, you will catch the Reaver of Common Sense uncensored, unfiltered, and only on shrmedia.com.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here is Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
And we're back.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
I did it again. You know, when the commercials change and the timing is slightly off, I get all screwed up.
You just get all worked up anyways. You get all uppity and just excited and just want to come back. Yeah, your little Vienna sausage fingers just start typing all over the place. It's cute. It's cute over there.
On the phone with us right now, we have Joseph Rice. Oathkeepers in Oregon. Oregon 3%ers, Pacific, Patriots, Northwest. We're talking about the Hammond Ranch incident, what's going on. So up to date, we're up to the $400,000 fine session.
No, that's the discounted fine.
That's the discounted
it's a $600,000 fine. The government was nice enough to give him a 33% discount if he would promise to give them first right of refusal for his land, which is right next door.
It's pretty much like the mob, right? It is almost like the mob coming in and saying, hey, if you pay us.
No, that's different because the mob is an illegal criminal organization that strong arms people into certain actions. This is the federal government. Wait.
You know what?
Never mind. Just forget I even mentioned that whole thing.
We can circle back to that in a few minutes if we need to. So, Joseph, let's pick it up. The $400,000 fine. And you're doing an amazing job of telling us the story, which is why we're just kind of letting you go. What's happened now? So we're up to date now.
Yeah, well, yes, you're up to date. Basically, the court, has... Hey, and before we go on, Pacific Patriots Network.
I'm sorry.
What is wrong with you? I even held up the sign with the proper name on it, and you're staring right at me, and you still read the wrong stinking... Sir, I apologize.
Hey, Joseph.
We are professionals, as you can tell.
I don't know you, but if you've ever worked with your wife, that's what I kind of go through here on the show. This is what it's almost like. It just never ends. It never ends.
Have you ever worked with somebody so incompetent?
Yes, I have, as a matter of fact.
Yes. And obese, that you're just...
Quiet, big nose. We have a guest.
So where we are is we've got... So Dwight's done his time. He's been home for 2 years, and Aiken sends him back to jail. And, at this point, after visiting with the prosecuting attorney for Pagdy, I believe everything's probably been done appropriately. They had their constitutional rights adhered to, jury of their peers, all those other things. And this is where everything goes off the rails. This is the United States of America, and, we are an intelligent people, and we understand what double jeopardy is. And so this is a concern. So I'm going to read exactly the Fifth Amendment. And what it states clearly, it says, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb. So if Dwight Hammond was sentenced by Judge Hogan to jail for the crime of arson, he went there, he served his time, he went home for 2 years, and now Judge Aiken is sending him back to jail. That definitely seems to violate the clause of the Fifth Amendment. The other part of it is if you read the Eighth Amendment, and that expressly states, nor excessive fine imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. So sending a 74-year-old rancher back to federal prison for more time after he had served and satisfied his sentence is the definition of cruel and unusual, because even in the article I referenced earlier, it states very rare. So where does it stop? Where do we as Americans stand up and go, oh, wait a minute, time out. That's not how it works. Lincoln stated, the masters of Congress and the courts are us, the people. So if we silently sit by and we play on our iPads or our smartphones or surf the internet, and we aren't paying attention to this important type of issues going on, we are slowly losing and, in a way, forfeiting our rights. So that led to our involvement and questioning, just like we did with sugar pine, do we have a willful constitutional rights violation occurring here of a United States citizen? And that's how it all circles back to all of us that took that oath to uphold and defend. That doesn't expire, and we have a moral obligation to adhere to it and act upon it. Many of us have stood in harm's way. Many of us have, watched the hostilities and the kinetic activity. We're used to it. It doesn't concern us, but it's a belief that we have in. I have a 10-year-old daughter. Unfortunately, she's going to grow up in a country that does not have the same liberties and freedoms that I knew when I was 10 years old. That pisses me off, and it bothers me. It's wrong. And how do we allow it?
So, Mr. Rice,
the only way we can change. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a couple things. One is a comment from one of our listeners who says when you pose the rhetorical question of, hey, basically where does it stop? How do we allow this to happen? And our listener said bread and circuses, right? What happened in Rome? Give them bread and circuses and distract the people. And I think really that's where we are in this country. A very astute observation from one of our listeners. And another point I wanted to touch on before you go on real quick: Fifth Amendment. The fact that it seems on its face certainly to be a violation of the Fifth Amendment potentially. Right? He's been in jeopardy once, served his time that one judge already sentenced him to, did his time, it's over, been out, and now he's again being put in jeopardy for the same offense that he's already completed his court-mandated sentence for. The Eighth Amendment violation, I would agree that there is an Eighth Amendment violation there. I would say that the argument there particularly would be the excessive fines, in that you have, like you pointed out, maybe $150,000 worth of property and a fine of 4 times that value, roughly $600,000 fine. I've never been very good at math. I don't math very well, but that certainly seems excessive on its face, and it even takes the whole argument out of the picture of, well, does age play a difference in terms of time of sentencing or whatnot, because it could be the rest of his life or her life if that's what's mandated by law, blah blah blah, and it's just a straight, hey, excessive fine, $600,000 fine for $150,000 in property. Clearly, that on its face would be excessive also. So sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to kind of touch base right here with what one of our listeners had to say, and just interject some just a personal thought.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and the fine is currently it's $400,000. They have paid it, but you bring up a really good point. It says nor excessive fines imposed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we talk about a lawful system, we're talking about criminal activity, and if you will, when the Constitution was applied, there had to be damage. There had to be somebody was hurt, injured, whatever it was. In this situation, there was not that. No one was damaged. No one was hurt. If you will, a real person, you or I, sustained no injury. There is no victim. Yet, why do we, the people, are allowing this type of governmental overreach that truly is harming a person? The other part of that Eighth Amendment side, the Hammond family believes he may not survive prison. He's 74 years old and going to a federal penitentiary.
Mm-hmm.
This is a rancher that's, when you think about it, you look at some of the horrific violence that occurs across our nation, and they're not federal crimes. They're not federally prosecuted. They're prosecuted in the state. Here's a rancher who has been a producer. He produces beef. It goes into the U.S. economy. We enjoy a steak. He's worked hard his life. This is not, a easy, fluff radio host job. This is a rancher.
Right.
No, he's got a point.
You got a great point. Listen, I have manicured nails. And I'm getting a massage right now. Okay, this is it. Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? I mean, these guys are up at dawn. I mean, I was out in Harney County over the weekend. When I drove out there, it was minus 22 degrees below zero. 365 days a year, their animals, their cattle have to be tended to. No matter what the climatic conditions are, they have to go out and feed them. They have to water them. They're literally up at sunrise. They're to bed at dusk. It's not an easy existence. It is hard work to produce cattle. But it's their life. It's what they know. It's their pursuit of happiness. They have a right to that. Now, when you think about the Hammond Ranch was put into place, I believe it was 1968. BLM had only been an agency for, I think, less than 10 years, if I'm correct. So now they're working with a new agency managing rangeland, which they were land management, to facilitate production of beef, ranchers' cattle. Well, when the Hammonds first started ranching, BLM is not the same agency that it is today. It's very, very different. And this is how the frustration starts. You have policies and decisions being made in Washington, D.C. that are implemented in Eastern Oregon by people that have never been there. And this is part of the argument that we've now seen occur at the wildlife refuge: local control, local management of lands. So what we did is, after meeting with the Hammonds, we met with the sheriff, we met with the prosecutor, we organized a support rally for the Hammonds, Dwight Hammond, that occurred this past Saturday. There was a convoy of people that left Bend, Oregon, and traveled out to Burns. There was 500 plus people at this rally. It was peaceful. People spoke. We marched, walked in force past the Hammond's house. They laid flowers and offered letters and cards of support to Susie Hammond and Dwight Hammond. Impromptu, they broke out into Amazing Grace and sang it for them. All in all, the 500 people stood in front of the Hammond's house for maybe 20 minutes, and then they moved on to the fairgrounds for a town hall meeting. And we sponsored the town hall meeting. The community out there has formed a committee of safety, and they have been empowered to start looking at these land use issues and trying to take over management of them. During the end of the rally, there was a small group that decided they wanted to take a hard stand, and they did a, hey, follow me, and off to the wildlife refuge they went. So we went into the town hall meeting, and as it's progressing, we find out that Almond Bunday and some locals have literally occupied the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. That was completely unplanned. It was not anything we endorse or support, but it has occurred. So that really changed things to, it's different. I mean, it's the reason we're talking right now, because it's occurred. Go ahead.
I just kind of want to sum up, and I'm sorry, but so essentially you guys organize what is deemed the appropriate protest. I also understand that you've kind of reached out to some local officials. Hey, this is going on. Just so you know, this is kind of our plan. So we're here as an act of solidarity.
Exercising our First Amendment rights.
But doing it in a respectful manner, and certainly
responsible manner.
Manner. I understand that they opened up the fairgrounds for you guys to have your town hall meeting because you were organized and because you were communicating. That they did that as to help assist and educate other people. Is that correct?
Yeah, they opened the fairgrounds, and we actually rented the room. We paid for the room to host a town hall meeting, and part of it is, and this is not a singular issue. It's multiple issues, and they do get complex. The Harney County has become what's known as a fire economy. They had a mill there that processed timber. That's gone by the wayside. The ranching allotments have been drying up, so people are looking for federal work because that's the largest employer right now in Harney County. And so many people will work for the BLM, or they'll work part-time or seasonally as firefighters. And that's how they literally survive. So there's a fear in Harney County for the population, the citizenry, to speak out against what many deem as abusive land management practices by the Bureau of Land Management. And
because they got them by the wallets,
well, they've
if you
had
will.
ranchers speak out in the past, and then they go to renew their grazing allotments for the cattle, and the BLM won't give it to them, or they won't renew it. It's a reprisatory action. And these are people that are working the land to provide for their families. They have a right to redress grievance to government without any expectation of reprisal. Those agencies are public agencies. They are public employees. They work for the citizens. They've got it tipped upside down. They think it's the other way around.
Yeah, and you can tell just from the IRS things that have gone on with this administration and so forth that clearly the federal government has lost sight of the fact that they work for the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, this isn't by any stretch the first example of this at all.
No, it's not. And one of the things that we've been working on and we've looked at is how do you contain the frustration that's growing in rural America in the West? Because it is.
I
they
agree.
may want to turn a blind eye to it, but it's boiling up, and we're seeing it. Sugar Pines, the Bundy Ranch, now out here with the Hammond Ranch in the situation. And so what we encouraged and we helped is we organized a committee of safety. And this gave and empowered the people of Harney County to organize together, unify, speak in a unified voice to their representatives in the county government and the federal agencies. Now, when you have a fire district, a school district, a mining district, a water district, those are literally government entities. BLM's policy mandates, it's not a if we want to, they are directed, they will coordinate to consensus. And so if the Harney County Committee of Safety has a land management policy that they develop, BLM must come to the table and BLM must show its plan, and they must adopt and draft their plan to be in consensus with the Harney County's plan. And that's one of the starts. The issue is BLM never does it. In Josephine County, we have a county legal counsel that has been trying since he was voted into office last year to establish coordination with the local BLM, and they don't return his phone calls. And they just ignore it. And the problem is there is no way to hold them accountable. There is no way, except for the courts, to drag them in front of a judge and go, they have to coordinate. Why are they not doing it? Now, that's an abuse of the court system. That
Totally.
is not how it should work. But part of their strategy is how many on this phone call can afford $350 an hour for an attorney?
I
Then
can't
all the time
afford.
you guys spend for them in court.
I can't afford $35 an hour for a mechanic to change my tires.
And
so.
you are an attorney.
I know,
which is weird.
So we're in this. It's come to this head now, and this is one of the things that I really want to start differentiating. Is, everything in the main media right now, the mainstream media, everything you see is the armed militia that took over the blah blah blah.
Which, by the way, the militia are the people as a whole.
Right.
It's even defined in current federal statute.
Right. So.
So there's that. So there's that argument, but let's not apply logic. I apologize.
And now we have what started off as this as an extremely peaceful in protest or movement, if you will. Like you said, a couple people got loud. It changed the direction, or if you will, or other people became involved that weren't initially involved. And now we have this.
So what happened?
Yeah, that's really the crux of that part is what happened.
Well, so Almond Bundy and those guys go out to the refuge and they occupy it, and they state that they want to see a return to constitutional values. They want to see the land in Harney County turned over, the federal land, the public land that's federally managed. They want to see that turned over to the county for local and county control.
And they're not part of your group, correct, at this point?
So that's what they do. So they go in and they occupy the wildlife refuge. Now, here's the weird part. It's a Saturday. It's a holiday weekend. They all go trucking out to the wildlife refuge. And this is not like downtown. This thing is a 40-minute drive out of Harney County, or the city of Burns, in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing around it. There's a single road. It's a road that goes from Burns down to French Glen, another town. And so they go out to this refuge, and there's no one there, and it's completely unlocked. No doors are locked. All the buildings are open, full of computer equipment, everything else. All the keys to the vehicle are readily exposed. All the keys to all the outbuildings are readily available. Nobody's there. The whole thing's unlocked.
So it's a typical federally run organization where nothing is how it should be.
Well, and that kind of confuses them.
Or was it staged?
Or right?
Yeah, they occupy it. And so here's where things change, and this is where I get frustrated with the national media. When we talk militia and they talk patriot groups, they want to make it believe that it's radical.
Mm-hmm.
But what you have are people that believe in constitutional values, the protection of our civil rights, our God-given rights, and they're peaceful. But they're willing to stand in defense of those rights. And, throughout history, we have watched many historical features. I mean, what would have happened if Rosa Parks had not occupied that seat on the bus? Those things and those occurrences in history happen. But what's different here is you have the Department of Justice using terms like insurrection, that this is an armed insurrection. And they're fanning the flames. Those people went out and they occupied the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge completely peacefully. It was open. There's a sign at the front that says open from sunrise to sunset. There are no gates. There are no fences. There was nothing locked. They went into publicly owned land and occupied it. No different than if a group of people go into the state capitol and have a sit-in and occupy it. No different than when Eric Holder in 1970 had an armed occupation of a Navy ROTC office and then later became the Attorney General of the United States.
Well, and at that point, he got a lot of criminal background from that case to become the Department of Justice head.
Yeah,
but one of the things that, I think kind of is being missed in the media is the group that you were originally working with wasn't the one that initiated the Occupy, if you will, of the BLM offices. That really wasn't the direction you guys were going, and it's really... Right, and I want to make sure that that's said and very clear. But what this also has done is this very much tarnishes, in the public opinion, we can talk about legal, not legal, standing up, not standing up, whatever. But the initial goal of your group, which was to bring awareness to the Hammond situation, bring
completely
some information,
detracted.
Just completely detracted from it, correct?
It did. It kind of turned the table. It was not what was expected. And what happened is it turned around and it caused some fear in the community.
Right.
It detracted from what happened with the Hammonds. And it was not sponsored by us. It was not endorsed by us. It actually pissed us off.
And honestly, it's good. And honestly, it's hurt your cause.
No, well, I don't know if it has. I mean,
in public opinion wise, do you think most of the public that are following this in the news and the mainstream media follow, differentiate between the group that ultimately and that's what I mean when I say I think at this point it's potentially hurt.
And mainstream media hasn't helped you at all by reporting the fact that this is not the initial intent of the original protest and movement.
But we are.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I watch CNN report that Dwight Hammond's has been convicted of arson, going to prison for 5 years, I'm like, wait a minute,
what?
The little thing you left out there.
Yeah.
He's going back a second time. I mean, what are you guys doing? You're not even reporting accurately. And that's the problem, is they're quick to rush and say armed protesters, armed militia, armed protesters. I went up to the refuge on Sunday after this all happened. We had a town hall meeting. Sunday we had a meeting of leadership, and rumors are flying around. They're done this, they've done that. The road's blocked off. We don't know what's going on. And I'm like, forget it. I'm going out there. I'm going to find out what's going on. So I drove up to the refuge. It takes about 40 minutes. Drove in. I knew a majority of people there, and basically went up and was like, okay, what the hell are you guys doing? What's your plan? What are you doing? And so that resulted in I sat down with Hammond and a number of people, and he explained his position. I said, well, okay, I understand. I do not agree. I do not endorse. I do not condone what you guys have done here. It was wrong. It was inappropriate. But you've done it. Here you are. what's your plan to move forward? And so they started discussing the message and bringing attention to the Hammonds and bringing attention to the abusive nature of BLM and the land use issues. And the message they're putting out of there is the frustration that people dealing with land use issues by federal management are experiencing all over the West. And you're seeing the frustration take hold. And what it has done is it has brought attention to the Hammonds issue.
Good.
The media, they want to report the guys with guns. When
Right.
I walked around Sunday and I looked at everything, I thought, what are they doing? I saw no one with a weapon. There was a single rancher that was carrying an old-style six-shooter on his hip. He's a rancher.
Well, I was
No
going to
one else
say,
was carrying weapons.
he probably puts that on with the shoes every day without even thinking about it.
Oh, yeah. It was worn, rusted, the whole thing.
That's awesome.
But, no one was carrying weapons. Nobody was kitted out in military combat fatigues. They're wearing street clothes. They had occupied it. And they were making a statement that what's happened to the Hammonds is wrong and inappropriate, and attention needs to be drawn to the abusive practice of the Bureau of Land Management. And constitutionally, this land that they're sitting on really needs to be returned to management of the county. And the county has better control of the values of the community and how to properly administer and manage the land. So that message that they're putting out is proper and correct. Unfortunately, it's not the message the national media wants to hear. It's not the story they want to report. They want to report a bunch of guys running around with weapons. But it's an occupation. They've occupied the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge to make a statement and draw attention to the Hammonds. And that's what it's done. People are talking about this. The interesting thing is the community was fearful of what they did, and in the last day or so, people are going the other way, going, well, wait a minute, we do believe in what they're saying. We don't like the way it was done, but they are saying and voicing our concerns as a community. So when I was there, ranchers that were surrounding the refuge were coming in and dropping supplies to them. I witnessed one rancher drop 50 pounds of elk meat and donated to them. The other thing that happened while I was there is the poor guy's in tears. He's not from Hardy County. He's from the county further out in eastern Oregon. I forget the name. And he's talking, and he's saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. All I know how to do is ranch. My father ranched, my grandfather ranched, and my great-grandfather ranched. It's all I know how to do. And he's upset because, excuse me, his ranch is in the proposed area for a new national monument. And they're facing their ranch being taken by eminent domain. So those are the things that you never hear in the mainstream media. Everybody wants to look at the guys with guns, but no one goes, well, wait a minute. At the Bundy Ranch, it was BLM. At Sugar Pine, it was BLM. And with the Hammonds, it's BLM.
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't anybody investigating or looking at the culture of BLM? They are the common denominator. I mean, Representative Greg Walden got on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives yesterday and delivered a speech eviscerating the Bureau of Land Management practices and the way they treat American citizens. Now, if our Congress cannot control or constrain that agency, its runaway practices, and its abusive nature of Americans, are we supposed to stand by and take it? Or do we look at the frustration that's being demonstrated in a wildlife refuge right now, and all of a sudden they're the bad guys, but why are they there? How do they come to be there?
So
That's the question that needs to be answered.
So I guess I have a couple of responses to that. One is Congress can easily control it. It's through the budgetary process and through the funding process, but they're choosing not to.
Yeah.
Two is there's an urgent warning that was on Oathkeepers.org warning that there's military spec op units that have been assigned to the standoff. I don't know if you've seen that or not, but if you go to Oathkeepers.org,
No, I'm very well aware, and that is true.
So let
me touch on that real quickly.
Yeah, please.
We know that there was a special operations unit that was mobilized out of Fort Lewis. They've witnessed them in the Burns area. They're dressing like local ranchers. Unfortunately, the military crew cut haircuts kind of gave them away.
Yeah, the 511 pants and the and the black and the black hooded ops gear sweatshirts.
Yeah. The hat with the patch.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is this is where the concern comes in, and it's not proven. This is just completely a theory. It's only an idea. It's been part of a philosophical discussion, if you will, amongst leadership. Is we have posse comitatus, and that prevents the military from any type of civilian law enforcement engagement.
Yep.
And it's a protection. It's so we don't have military regimes and we maintain our three branches of government. So what's interesting here is the Department of Justice was using insurrection. The Department of Justice talks to DOD. This is an insurrection in Harney County. The United States of America declared a war on terror. We have the Patriot Act. We also have the National Defense Authorization Act. They are going down the path of labeling this occupation, the same thing that we see with Occupy Wall Street or a state capitol with some citizens protesting, as potential domestic terrorism. That gives them the authority, and somebody in DOJ has thought they've cleverly figured this out, to employ military assets to bring this thing to an end, or if it gets out of hand.
Well, and I hate to say it, but earlier this year, everyone, when Operation Jade Helm was underway, training for almost this exact sort of thing, allegedly for overseas implementation. But this is one of the biggest concerns that the people in this country had, was, hey, is our own military training to infiltrate and be able to be a fast response for our own citizens? And when something like this happens, it kind of shores up that belief for some people.
And I want to have an interesting note here on insurrection v. revolution. And I've had this discussion with several folks. And you look at the American Revolution, and when the American citizens armed themselves and stood up and took on the British, and what you had that, or even the Civil War. I mean, nobody was tried for treason under Civil War or anything like that, but even the Civil War, you had armed action taken by the citizenry, but it was backed by elected folks or an elected group, an elected body. The colonists had their congresses and whatnot at the state level, and ultimately the federal convention, that they authorized the use of force or troops or whatnot. So these armed citizens were acting on behalf of an elected group of folks from the people. And in an insurrection, you have folks that are acting outside of that. And while I agree with the message, for sure, there still has to be, like you mentioned yourself, we are a country of laws. We do have the Constitution as our ultimate document, the law of the land. And when I get worried when groups act, whether they're armed, particularly when they're armed, outside of local authority. So if a county elected body, for example, were behind this, something of that nature, something that would give, I don't even want to say legitimacy, because it's not legitimacy of the message, but it's methodology of delivering that message. And I think going down that road of an armed occupation, I'm not saying that's what this is or isn't. I haven't been there and seen the folks where they are or not. You have, I believe what you're saying. There was one rancher with a rusty 6-shooter on his hip. But in terms of globally speaking, when you have a group of armed citizens who rightfully are standing up for their rights, there comes a point where that can cross over into an insurrectionist type situation, and then it almost legitimizes the federal authority to act on that. And it's a real fine line, but absent that elected body, and that's kind of where the challenge comes in when you were talking earlier about, hey, starting locally and getting those local officials, elected officials and so forth behind and getting to that. Does that make sense?
It does. And so I see and understand what you're saying. So let's take another step further.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at the authority of law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have an inalienable, God-given right for self-protection,
mm-hmm.
that's where the Second Amendment comes in. I mean, the Second Amendment was especially instilled for protection for government overreach. And we have to remember,
correct,
wages come off of war, they've been slaughtered, and they always wanted the ability of the citizenry to be able to defend and protect themselves. That's the purpose of it. So what do you have where, if you're talking a local county sheriff, he's a CLEO. He is the chief law enforcement officer of that county.
Mm-hmm.
And he states and says what happens and what doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the problem in this is, unfortunately, Sheriff Ward is appointed and he's new in the position. And I don't think anybody wants to start their job and be slammed by something like this. The poor guy is, overwhelmed with this situation while he's still trying to get his feet under him. But he is the chief of law enforcement, and the sheriff has a tremendous amount of constitutional authority. What gives the Bureau of Land Management the authority to have armed law enforcement officers interacting with the citizens of Harding County? What constitutional authority gives them that?
Well, unless it was granted to them by the sheriff in that county.
Well, or if they're taking action on federal lands and they're federal
within the county, right?
And they're federal law enforcement officers, then I guess they would have.
That's a trick question, guys.
Right, that's kind of the $1,000 question.
BLM gave themselves that authority.
How so?
It wasn't granted. BLM, the United States Forest Service, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Health and Human Services, all have given themselves, the Internal Revenue has granted themselves the ability of law enforcement, or what we believe to be regulation or statute. They formulate their law enforcement. If you look back through our constitutional and our statutory history, the FBI was intended, along with the U.S. Marshals Service, to be the law of the land. The Marshals enforced it. The FBI investigated it. Now we have administrative agencies that have created their own law enforcement arms without the authority of Congress. Congress never authorized them that.
And I'll agree with you on that. We've talked about that in the show in the past. That a lot of these, it seems like every government agency has some sort of law enforcement branch. And very few were originally designed. And I'll even argue with you that originally the FBI wasn't even involved. It was originally the Marshal Service that was supposed to be the federal law enforcement. And the FBI came on early 1900s, I believe. They weren't the FBI then. They were some ridiculous other name. But the problem that happens is, that is a fight that needs to be had, and I agree with you. But part of the problem is you have local law enforcement, sheriffs in some counties, granting them local authority to act as peace officers within their county.
Here's the other problem is Congress funds them.
Right.
And by Congress funding them, have they, in essence, granted authority for them to continue to operate because they are, in fact, funding even that particular
They're giving
arm.
them the money, so they're
right.
It's almost like saying it's okay, right?
Right.
It's like giving your kid beer when they're 16, be like, I'm not telling you can drink it, but I'm not telling you can't, and walking out of the room. You've put it in their hands.
remember, they had to pass the bill so they could read it and know what was in it. I mean, that's how Congress is acting.
Oh, I agree.
Right.
I wholeheartedly
we agree wholeheartedly.
agree.
But the fact that they're funding these particular branches of these particular regulatory agencies, in fact, gives some
Credence.
Legitimacy
Yeah.
to their claims of peace officer powers and their enforcement of the U.S. Code.
It doesn't make it right.
It doesn't make it
It
right.
should be defined specifically, and that's something. But I think a lot of this goes back to an out of control federal government who's too big for anybody's britches. So much that happens all the time and is allowed to continue, versus somebody stepping up and going, "Hey, somebody want to tell me why the Department of, I don't know, ass scratching in Washington D.C. has 250 cops that are assigned to investigate public ass scratching." Nobody does that, and I agree with you. It needs to be stopped. Now, I understand, and we've talked about this before. Clint, what was the agencies that all did the exact same thing? It was some environmental thing.
Yeah.
There was 4 agencies.
It was like the National Oceanic something.
Right.
Fish. It was
4 agencies doing the exact same thing in the exact same place, 4 different budgets, 4 different sets of cops. This all comes down to, at the end of the day, yet again, an outrageously large and bloated federal government that's not being held accountable by the people.
And the issue about lands, most federally managed lands fall under the definition of proprietorial interest only.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you start talking about admiralty or maritime courts, contract courts versus constitutional courts, magistrate versus judge.
Mm-hmm.
If you go back to the whole issue of arms, I think you kind of brought it that full circle, that who are these guys? And they come in. I mean, at the Sugar Pine Mine, we had a miner. He was in his late 70s. He maybe weighed 130 pounds soaking wet. He came in, and he tells us that he's in his hole, and the guy's a hermit. He scratches his hard rock, grinds it up, and then gets his gold, goes into town once a month, sells it, and buys supplies. He literally is using a pick and shovel to dig it out of the ground. No mechanical means. He's in his hole, and his dog starts barking. His dog howls in pain. He looks up out of the hole, and there is a BLM agent pointing a gun at his head. And he has just maced the guy's dog. Now, he's on his mining claim. He's legally operating his mining claim. And this BLM officer has not followed the FBI escalation of force scale, and he's drawn a weapon on the guy. Now, why? And is that appropriate and proper? And so when we talk about weapons and we talk about things, that gentleman has as much right to protect himself from that type of inappropriate action as the officer does from hostile action. So when people go out onto the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, they do have weapons. They're respectful, and they don't brandish them. Mm-hmm. There is a difference. They have kept them. But I can guarantee you, if any federal authority goes out there for what is a lawful protest, the right of assembly, they've occupied a building, they aren't coming with a bouquet of flowers. They're going to be coming with weapons.
Well, if it's the FBI, they may accidentally show up with a bouquet of flowers, forgetting it's not a gun,
and bust out their pocket calculators. Right. I want to.
We got to wrap at the bottom of the hour, so I
want to touch on one point real quick to kind of bring it around, as you indicated, full circle. You talked about the right of the citizens to be armed, which absolutely that should be a no-brainer argument to anybody that reads the Constitution or any of the foundational documents and writings that talk about the Second Amendment. But so they have a right to be there with arms, and then the agents of the government there with arms. So if you're talking about insurrection versus revolution, I think you really have to look at the point of first action, because if the first action is on the point of the citizen engaging with that weapon, now potentially you have that insurrection versus you have first action being a hostile act taken by an agent of the government on a peaceful assembly without provocation. Now you have the right of the people for self-defense against the government.
No, and you're absolutely correct in that. And my understanding, and even with all the operations we have run, the standing has been we will not fire unless fired upon.
Right.
And it'll probably be multiple times, and it will always be in a defensive posture. My concern here is with this heavy language. Is this to curtail the peaceful, the right of the people for peaceful assembly? Is this restricting the ability of people to redress grievance to government? Now, if you look at the Occupy Wall Street movement, and you look at how it was portrayed in America through the media, they were like, they were just a bunch of hippies, this, that, and such.
Poor, misunderstood, downtrodden people who can't even get a chance at a job.
Yeah. Well, when I went over to Afghanistan, my rotation over there, I'm talking with a guy that had been retired from Aloha Airlines for 6 years, living the good life in Hawaii. And after the economic downturn and crash, he lost 40% of his retirement and had to go back to work. And if you look at many of those people, they lost their retirements, their homes, their nest eggs, and they had to go back to jobs that have withered and dried up in America. And part of that, as you look at what happened in that situation, Iceland had the same thing. They threw all their bankers in jail. The U.S. hasn't prosecuted a single one. And when you look at the reduction in economy, we are regulating ourselves out of prosperity. And any nation and the greatness of that nation comes from the ability to manufacture and produce. And I'm absolutely going to agree that there have been mistakes made in the management of timber and mineral and things, but we have learned from them. We can't go to one extreme to the other. We have to find a middle ground, a balance, where ranchers can be ranchers. They can raise their cattle without being constantly harassed by burdensome and oppressive regulations. Timber guys can work in the woods, cutting a tree. Miners can dig ore out of the hill to produce phones and pens and electronics. We have to get back to a nation of producers utilizing the land for all users and all recreators, however we want to do it, but we've got to get away from this abusiveness by these agencies.
Now, is this group occupying this space for 24 hours a day? Are they there around the clock?
Yes.
Now, you've indicated that their signs. You've indicated their signs posting closed or open sunrise to sunset. So, if they're after sunset, is that federal land legally able to be closed after sunset? And if so,
I'm sorry, you said federal land. That's public land.
Public land
managed by a federal agency.
Okay, so it is proprietary then.
Yeah, it's public land. It's managed by a federal agency, and
so,
no
and
one's gone up there and asked them to leave because they were trespassing.
So nobody has gone up there and asked them to leave because they're violating rules or whatnot. It's somebody has indicated it's closed after sunset, be it county authority or whatnot. So they're not there unlawfully after sunset, correct?
I guess.
Okay.
I mean, you got to determine lawful. I mean, my understanding, if you look at the Oregon statutes, trespass, you have to be notified. And if you refuse to adhere to the notification, then you are considered trespassed. But
so that hasn't happened yet.
My understanding is no.
And that's a key point. And that's why I was asking the question. Hey, if is some authority, lawful authority, say that land is closed after dark, and if so, have they? My follow-up question was going to be: have they been asked to leave? And if not, then yeah, they're there lawfully. But if there is a legal authority, and I don't know that particular location or the statutes that apply to it. I don't know whether it's state or county or federal that they're trying to apply. If they're saying that it is closed and they are there unlawfully, they've been asked to leave and they have failed to do so, Well, then, if an arrest situation does take place, and if it's a lawful arrest based upon the laws that have been passed, then that becomes a potential sticky situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I guess you have to look at it. I mean, it's public land. They've occupied it. They've made a protest. I think to pursue, after the whole entire situation with Dwight Hammond being a violation of the Fifth and Eighth Amendment rights, to now go after these guys who are standing up for him and bringing attention to abusive practices of an agency because no one else is doing it, to charge him with trespass, that would seem to be pretty petty.
I would absolutely agree, and we only get about a minute left. However, I'd like to remind you that you're dealing with the federal government, and you're dealing with a group of people who, quite honestly, are trying to make an example out of groups that have a tendency to protest the federal government in a legal manner to try to discourage it, in my humble opinion, which is why you saw the action at the Bundy Ranch, all that.
Yeah, and one of our listeners wrote in and said, hey, the feds can only back down so many times.
Right.
No, and that's a very valid point and very legitimate, and that is a concern. But let's a couple quick things is, they say anti-government. What's the difference between anti-government, insurrection, and accountability? The government hates to be held accountable, and this is what's occurring right now, accountability of government. That's what we need to do as a people. We need to do it strength in numbers. And it has to happen that way.
Totally different than anti-government.
Yeah, it's more pro-government because you want the government to follow the will of the people
right.
and fall within their constitutional limits.
Joe, this has just been awesome. It really has been. Make one last point and then tell everyone where they can find your groups, and we got to take a quick break because we still have two other segments we got to try to stick to.
I would support any online petition for compassionate release to the Bureau of Prisons for Dwight Hammond and clemency for Dwight Hammond and Stephen Hammond. And you can find current updates on the situation at the PatriotsNetwork.com website. That's updated a number of times throughout the day with the current situation and our position.
And I would even recommend flooding the White House with emails, asking them to as much as you possibly can.
I would challenge Judge Aiken's decision. Why did Judge Aiken violate her constitutional oath for Fifth and Eighth Amendments? I mean, why is she willfully violating someone's constitutional rights, and she just ignored it for the convenience of the court?
I think
improper. She should be held accountable.
I think it's a great question to ask, and I think it's a great outcome to seek. Joseph Rice, sir, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, sir.
I appreciate it, gentlemen.
Been a pleasure.
Stay safe and liberty on.
Liberty on, and Happy New Year to you, sir.
Thanks.
We'll be right back here on the Sackheads Radio Show live on the SHR Media Network.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians.
You got a business. You didn't build that.
A team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying cow for the stupid pro.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on SHRmedia.com.
Hey, it's Jersey Joe from Reefer of Common Sense, and we have moved to a new night and time every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on shrmedia.com. You will catch the Reaver of Common Sense uncensored, unfiltered, and only on shrmedia.com.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here is Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And welcome back to the Sackheads Radio Show live on the SHR Media Network. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you again, Joseph, for spending an hour and a half with us. You can't hear me?
No.
Hold on.
Is this thing on?
You're on.
Is this thing on?
It would help if I didn't turn you all the way down.
Why would you do that to me?
Well, because I'm doing a bunch of different things. It doesn't matter. What matters is...
Because I can't hear you at all in my headset.
Oh, man. Once again, thank you to Joseph, and thank you for everyone who stuck around, asked some great questions. You guys were outstanding. There's a couple other things we want to get to before the end of the show, however. And the next one would be, I don't know, a little thing called executive action.
What? What happened? There was nothing that happened this week.
Well, let's be honest. Most of these actions that he took against the Second Amendment, the president, if you will, the only one that I thought deemed having a conversation about, correct me if I'm wrong, is expanding the tracking of stolen weapons. Can we agree that that at least is worth conversing about?
Mm-mm.
Not at all.
Nope.
Why not?
Why? Of stolen weapons?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, but, again, doesn't need to be done through executive action. All the other ones, the quote-unquote expanded background checks, the adding of 150 ATF agents, I don't know, I guess in a year and a half when they're
ATF, ass to face?
Something like that. But again, I don't want to talk about Chris Matthews just yet.
Okay.
Okay, so you're going to do something that you didn't have to do an executive action to authorize, as long as they find it in their budget. So I don't see what that is. That's a big deal. All of these things, he could have done at any point in his career. He didn't have to wait for the need for a distraction away from a terrorism incident in this country to try to bring up how much he loves people. He certainly didn't need to be sniffing onions in the middle of his speech
in order to try and force a tear.
That was uncomfortable, and not even
that was
like
bizarre.
Not even like, oh, he's emotional. That's kind of sweet. Uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable. Like, wow, this is the worst acting I've seen. Like, at least Mr. Ed looked almost natural.
Like he was talking.
And
he had peanut butter on his gums.
Right. I don't know.
Maybe Obama had peanut butter on his
onion under
gums.
the eyes. Something.
I don't know.
There had to be something. Do you find... I found all these actions to be, A, ridiculous, but B, mostly feckless.
I found his executive action to be unconstitutional.
All of them?
Yes.
And
we've had this talk about executive action.
Right.
Look, if he gives an executive order for ATF to find in their budget to hire 150 new agents, I'm okay.
And that's what I was getting at
right.
earlier.
Hey, look, okay. You're the chief executive. That's one of the agencies of the executive branch. You're not authorizing more funds because you're not Congress. And you're telling them to hire 150 new agents and to figure it out in their budgets. Okay. But you're expanding background checks and trying to redefine what a gun dealer is.
Right.
That is the problem.
That's a huge problem.
Because you are now, in essence, writing law and redefining something that is in law that was passed by Congress. And you can't do that.
Right.
Constitutionally.
And I don't think that'll stand. I don't think that'll stand up to a judicial test.
But why does it have to go to a judicial test?
I know. I agree with you.
He's acting unconstitutionally.
I agree with you.
Why doesn't Congress defund the executive?
I don't. They should. But this is part of my problem, right? Everyone. He is
knowingly acting unconstitutionally. He is violating his oath of office.
Oh yeah, I agree. I don't disagree with you. One of the things that I said is, in his speech, he said, well, we went to Congress to do this, and Congress wouldn't do it.
So I guess I have to because I'm a king.
Right. Well, the will of the people dictates Congress's behavior, or it should. The will of the people don't want these changes by and large. Just because some loud people do and some pundits on a leftist TV show doesn't mean everybody, by and large, wants these reforms. And if we do have a reform, it needs to be done correctly through Congress, signed by the president.
And if they want the reforms and Congress refuses to do it, that's what elections are for.
Right. Right. And we can have a constitutional convention whenever you want. I mean, there's things you can do
right
that would change the Constitution. Now, everyone on the left is saying, this isn't a big gun grab and this, that, and I love, I've watched people be like, it's been 24 hours since Obama killed the Second Amendment, but yet gun sales are through the roof. Well, yeah, gun sales are through the roof. There's a reason for it. Everybody and their brother is convinced that the end game of this president and Democrats in general is the gun grab. And they'll never admit it because they know if they ever come out and say that, the country would go upside down. That's just a known fact. I go back to Nudge by Cass Sunstein. This is a nudge moment, right? They're going to make it so cumbersome to own a weapon that most people are going to turn around and say, it's not worth my effort. And I agree that the casual shooter who just target shoots or whatever, and that's their purpose, and I don't care why you own a gun, but if that's your sport and that's the only reason why you're doing it, but in order to get a gun now to commit that sport, you have to go through 45 days of paperwork and fingerprinting and interview by an ATF agent, whatever, you're going to turn around and pick up Ultimate Frisbee because it's easier. And you're starting to obtain or acceptance long term.
Basically, you're nudging people towards a particular end.
Yeah.
Where have we heard that before?
I don't know.
Somebody should read a book called Nudge.
And by Cass Sunstein. And the problem is when we don't have, but they have we're in a whole world of
school?
No, I bleeped out what
Recess.
I said. Oh. So, like I said, he could have ordered the ATF and the FBI through executive action to find in their budget a way to better track stolen weapons.
Right.
And that would have been fine. I wouldn't have had a problem. Don't get me wrong. I am not against changes that are a good change. Right? A weapon goes stolen. We need to be able to find it because we know most of the crimes that happen with firearms in this country happen with stolen weapons. So you want to solve that problem. I will have that conversation with you.
But if a measure of that is to ensure some form of full registration...
Negative.
To keep exactly.
But once a gun goes stolen, if anyone knows how the system works, that weapon becomes registered once you report it. Whether you want it to be or not, that's how they track it, and it lives forever.
But then once it's found, it should be taken out of the system and the record expunged.
I agree, but it won't happen. I agree it should happen, but it won't ever happen.
Right.
And actually, Big Fat Polly had that problem with his weapon when it got stolen a couple years ago, and it was the same thing.
Big Fat Polly.
But the good part is it got recovered before it could be used in a crime. The bad part is that weapon is now forever tracked.
And just to clarify, one of our listeners had a concern. By good change, you meant that is constitutional.
Yeah, absolutely. On this show, what the hell else would I mean? Not the good change that the left means. So when the left says good change, everyone knows that means to strip it away.
Right. I think they meant good change meaning not just an opinion, but good change meaning based on constitutional principles.
Yes.
Whether you agree with it or not,
yes,
it's constitutional.
Yes. What the hell else? What else would I mean?
You should clarify.
No, I shouldn't have to on this show.
You should clarify because we have some new listeners, perhaps.
Well, maybe they should go listen to the goddamn archives. Which you can find on Spreaker under the Sackheads Radio Show. No, of course I mean that. But I appreciate the question to clarify.
No, you didn't. Otherwise, you wouldn't have acted all uppity about it.
But again,
I'm glad I'm not riding home with you tonight.
You know it's bad when Liberal Jake texts us.
Yes.
And says, what was the exact quote? Can you find it real quick?
Hang on, I have it.
Liberal Jake, who's very reasonable when it comes to guns. Like, as Liberal Jake is about certain things, when it comes to firearms, Liberal Jake is very reasonable.
He texted both of us. It was on the text string for both of us.
I adamantly oppose this abuse of executive privilege. Liberal Jake says this. It is shameful and unconstitutional. And then he attached a cartoon that was actually really funny. And he said he'd be in favor of certain things, and we would have. But for him to have that statement right off the bat,
right,
tells you that the tarnish with this president at all these gun grabbing things and sidestepping Constitution and Congress to get his way.
I would say subverting, but go ahead if you want to soft pedal it.
Subverting. It shows you that he's starting to wear even with his base. So, like I said, these are all ridiculous. Most of them are, at the end of days, will be feckless. And most of them, at the end of days, will be challenged and lost in court.
Which it should
not have to be. However, it will be.
Now, we are at ideological war with Chris Matthews.
We are at ideological war with Chris Matthews.
However.
Hold on, I think I have a Chris Matthews sound. Chris Matthews. Ideological war.
I don't like that.
Okay. What about this one? Chris Matthews. Ideological war.
Much better. Much better. So I have to give him credit on this little tidbit here. He essentially asked Hillary Clinton, what the difference between a Democrat and a socialist is.
Hillary Clinton.
And she says basically that that question should be directed to Bernie Sanders, who's a self-described Democratic socialist. And Chris Matthews came back and said, "You see, I'm asking you."
Right. Do you know the difference?
And Hillary Clinton said, "I'm not the one." And then didn't go on to explain the difference. And then she says, quote, "I can tell you what I am. A wombat." No, she didn't say that. I misread the quote here.
A bitch?
"I am a progressive Democrat who likes to get things done and who believes that we are better off in this country when we're trying to solve problems together.
Aww.
Getting people to work together. There will always be strong feelings, and I respect that from, the far right, the far left, libertarians, whoever it might be. We need to get people working together." But she didn't answer the question. And I love it, the fact that Chris Matthews, said, "You see, I'm asking you."
Well, and again, like I said earlier,
Debbie Wasserman Schultz had this same question.
Right.
You would think they would be prepared.
Well, and he's starting to hit. And again, I don't know if Chris Matthews changed the bourbon he guzzles by the bottle. I don't know if he got struck by lightning, but he's hit now 2 prominent Democrats with this question. You would think at some point they would have the answer canned and ready, right?
Right.
And they don't. And again, I had this conversation with a good friend of mine, Dennis, and we were talking about Hillary. And I said, the more you see her, the more exhausted she looks, the more scared she kind of looks. She's not a savvy politician like she was a couple years ago. Even as recent as the Benghazi testimony, when things were kind of water off a duck's back with her, she was kind of dipping and dodging, and she'd kind of stay low, bob and weave. You're starting to see all of the email scandals and all this other stuff wear down on her, and then you get an answer like that. And then to accuse Bernie Sanders of being a socialist, which he is admittedly a socialist, but for her to say that as one candidate to another Democrat on a national television show was either a humongous mistake or absolutely politically brilliant, because she's trying to get his dink knocked in the dirt.
Or she doesn't know.
Or she just doesn't know.
Because Sanders is running on the Democratic ticket, and there is no frickin' difference. Otherwise, she should have said, yeah, he's the socialist, and here's the difference of why I am not, and why you should vote for me as your Democratic nominee. That might have been the better answer.
But
I'm just saying. What is that is like a candidate's dream question. Essentially, it's what's the difference between you and the person you're running against who is a socialist?
Yep.
And you are a Democrat. What is the difference between you, a Democrat, and your opponent, a socialist? And she couldn't answer it. And she couldn't answer it because there is no stinking difference.
There was no difference. Well, and
other than to quote Kindergarten Cop, boys have a penis, girls have a vagina.
That's the difference.
That's the difference between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, as
that's
explained.
Still debatable.
We have no confirmation of either one.
Man, I said, the mainstream media right now is pushing Hillary as the nominee.
Right.
If you look at them. Bernie Sanders, who I think is the Donald Trump on the left, is not expected to beat her when it comes time for primaries. What happens when Hillary Clinton, if Hillary Clinton cannot make the primaries, say, I don't know, she has a legal battle in a federal court somewhere, and she's remanded to custody? Are the Democrats, where's their plan C at this point? Because I really think they're in a bad way. I don't know about you, but I think Hillary got news the last couple of weeks that there may be things you can't duck in this. As we all know, the DOJ that would prosecute is run by this president who is not a Hillary fan. I think he's more of a fan of Bernie.
But he is a party guy.
But to what extent? Think about it.
Would he give up the White House to the alternate party?
Well, yeah, he's going to be in charge of the UN soon.
Who's going to have authority over?
I don't think right, because he's going to give them the authority.
We'll have blue helmets in our city streets, right?
I don't think he cares. Listen, we all know this guy has bigger aspirations than the White House, which is sad to say, but true. He's not leaving D.C. so he can go to all those parties and schmooze. He's going to be in every single socialist, communist country in the next couple of years visiting as a former president. You think Jimmy Carter's a pain in the ass right now? Wait till you see this guy when he is unleashed.
And he's a lot younger.
Oh, yeah. No, we got...
Speaking of communist countries, you see North Korea supposedly tested a nuke successfully?
Yes. Hello. That's actually live audio from what happened that day.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. All right, I'll give you allegedly on that. And there was a CNN analyst. I don't have his name right now, but he was a former UN Things Go Boom Committee, the Atomic Committee, who said that he believes that not only can North Korea miniaturize nuclear weapons
and leaders,
and successfully every time.
It's weird.
That might be my favorite joke of the night. Yes, it was technically a hydrogen bomb and not a full-blown atomic bomb. But he was saying that, and they may not have the ICBM capability yet, but certainly medium range, which makes it a big threat. I think it's funny that you had 10 other nations who surround North Korea who immediately came out and said, hey, we believe this was exactly what we say it was, an H-bomb test. We believe that this further destabilizes the region. Something needs to be done. And our administration comes out and goes, we live further enough away that it won't really affect us till the wind takes over, so we're not going to confirm or say anything. You have Japan, who doesn't have a standing military per se, being like, whoa, guys!
Not to mention South Korea, where we actually have troops.
Yeah, I know, but, we all know that...
Okay, so you don't like that one. What about Iran launching a missile within like 150 yards of our warships?
Foreign policy's fine. Listen, those guys right there promised they'll be good. And so far, did they hit the ship?
No, but they were probably trying to.
Did they hit the ship?
No.
No harm, no foul. That's Obama's newest foreign policy. No harm, no foul. So if they're not doing anything that technically hurt anybody, even if it was a mistake, no foul. Suicide vest that won't go off, that's fine, no foul. Accidental. You just having a bad day. You're guilty of poor electronics.
Right. You should have hired a better wireman. Is essentially the message.
You're guilty of poor outsourcing. Mm-hmm. And that's actually something that the federal government controls.
Let me guess, China built that vest?
No, North Korea, actually.
Oh, okay. Perfect. And it was miniaturized, which is why nothing would work.
Which is why it just looked like a squib on your shoulder.
Right.
Good job. You can go get Band-Aids. A miss is as good as a mile. Yeah, well, here's the problem again. North Korea is in that whole what do we call them? Oh, what was the term that we used for that whole group of countries? The assholes, the axis of... we had a good one a couple months ago.
I don't remember. I have to listen to that.
I have to write it back up in the board again. The axis of idiots, essentially, they're part of that, right? We know China has the capability to miniaturize and deliver. We know Russia does as well. But you have a country like North Korea that's off on their own, and you have a country like Iran that's looking to increase their warheads, self-admittedly.
Why wasn't that captain like, it's coming right for us, and then like launch some aircraft?
They were on alert.
Big deal.
I know. More should have been made of that, and it wasn't. That actually bothers me too. That was just kind of like, look at the guys in Oregon. They're hanging out in an office that was left open 24/7 with government computers in it and stuff like that. Hey, what about the missile from the Iranians that just missed our boat?
It was just a carrier.
It was just a carrier. But hey, did you see what Trump said? Oh, what is that? Yeah, okay, we can get to that. One of the things that I've noticed as time goes on, if you have a news app on your phone, it doesn't matter who it is. watch the order in which certain things are listed on that app, because they do it by what they deem as important. And if I can remember, it was last week when that missile was fired. That was like number 6 down the bottom of the list versus like a local feel-good story about somebody who adopted a sick doggy, which is a great story, but I don't think it should be above the American ship fired at.
Or fired near.
And a couple other ones. So when we talk about mainstream media kind of doing what they think is right to protect certain things, and it's not necessarily Constitution and country, it's more about people and situations. I'd start being a little nervous. Another great story, and I got to wrap it up, but ISIS has found some scientists who have enabled old SAM anti-aircraft missiles functioning again and retrofitting them with heat-seeking components. White Mamba in the chat room, thank you, sir. I did want to mention that this week because I saw that earlier. Oh, man. A lot to talk about. It's fine. Everything's okay. Don't worry. Hey, you don't need a gun. Everything will be A-okay.
Hey, your gun's not going to do anything against a heat-seeking missile or against an Iranian warship launching missiles near our ships.
What are you worried about?
It's fine.
Just keep calm, relax, have another beverage, take some pills. Who gives a shit? Just, you know what? You've worked hard all day at asking other people to do things for you. Put your feet up, relax.
Right, and the government, we're here to do that for you.
Hey, government's here to help you. Folks, that's it for the Sackheads Radio Show on the 6th of January, 2015. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thank you again, Joseph Rice, for hanging out with us. Make sure you check out the cause and follow along what's going on up there. Everyone in the chat room, thank you so much for joining us and your feedback. SHRmedia.com. Check out the new website. Thank you, Dan Butcher, for all your damn hard work that you do in that. And you really mean a lot to us, and I can't say thank you enough. We'll see you next Wednesday.
Thank you, Ken, because we don't just want to thank white people.
Right here on the Sackheads Radio Show, live in the SHR.
And I apologize that Sean left you out because he's
Network.
The blatant bigot.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Times are dark. The people are misled by corrupt politicians, lied to by establishment media, and deceived by the false messages of Islam. A nation looking for direction needs a guide. It needs a man with a cane. I'm Dave Milner. Join me on Spreaker, SHR Media, Pundit Press Radio, and YouTube through the SHR Media page for a different kind of commentary on the unpleasant blind guy. Because the truth is not always pleasant.
In a world controlled by corrupt politicians.
You got a business. You didn't build that.
A team of ordinary men emerge from the ashes to give voice to the voiceless and hope to the hopeless. Sackhead Sean.
Dude, I'm not saying cow for the stupid crow.
Sackhead Clint.
All good friends of ours usually show up drunk.
Also starring Sacco as the producer.
I'm a little bit drunk, 'cause I'm drinking.
They are the Sackheads Radio Show. Every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific on SHRmedia.com.
Hey, it's Jersey Joe from Reefer of Common Sense, and we have moved to a new night and time every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on SHRmedia.com. You will catch the Reefer of Common Sense uncensored, unfiltered, and only on SHRmedia.com.
Hello, I'm Matt, a student at Hillsdale College. Here is Hillsdale President Larry Arnn on the continuing relevance of the Constitution.
Many argue today that the Constitution is outdated because it addresses problems peculiar to the 18th century. Some parts of the Constitution do read rather quaintly. Consider the injunction against titles of nobility in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. But is that so outdated? The purpose of the injunction is to prevent the government granting special privileges to some for partisan reasons. This strikes at the heart of the rule of law. The crony capitalism so common today is a place where the government bestows favors and tax dollars on some businesses to give them a leg up over others. This is exactly the kind of thing the Constitution was meant to prohibit. The Constitution is not so outdated after all.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.com.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
The best late-night conservative talk show in America, Sackheads Radio. And listen, there are no people better on the air to give you the best in conservative talk than Sackhead Sean and Sackhead Clint. And we're working on the immigration papers for a certain other guy who happens to work here, too. For those who are tuning in around the world to the best in late-night conservative talk, Sackheads Radio.
Talk News. Talk News.
Radio.
Talk News. Talk News.
Radio.
The best late-night conservative talk show in America. In America.
In America.
And in this web was a large, I'm pretty sure it was the biggest spider I've ever seen.